I'd like to talk for a minute about an issue that's getting more and more attention. That's the issue which scientifically is called stratospheric aerosol geoengineering, also called the chemtrail issue.
I'm very aware of the chemtrail versus contrail controversy. As far as I'm concerned, it's an open and shut case. I have been watching the development of jet travel from its very beginning. I used to live near the Los Angeles airport. Remember when the first jets came in and landed? Man, they made a big noise. We never heard a noise like that before. And we used to go down and sit at the end of the runway and watch these jets come in and take off because it was a novel experience. I've been watching jets all my life, and I know about jet contrails. I've watched them. They're vaporized moisture, ice crystals, and they get out there in the atmosphere, and then they effervesce and evaporate and then disappear, and you can see them. The plane moves along, and the little white trail follows right behind it, and usually about 10 or 20 lengths of the plane or thereabouts, and then it's gone. And you can still see them that way, by the way, once in a while. So there goes a contrail. These other things we're talking about are not at all the same phenomena at all. These planes go by, and they billow out this white smoke, and it covers the sky from horizon to horizon. It doesn't dissipate at all. And they crisscross each other, and you see this thing cover the sky and turn it milky, and then people start having trouble breathing, and then you hear stories about the aluminum and barium deposits that they're picking up and the residue. And you put it all together, and I don't see how anybody who's got their eyes open and their mind open can come to any other conclusion but that somebody is spending a lot of money and effort to spray the planet. The question is, why? I have my own theories, but I hope that there will be some good investigative reporters go out there and get us the answer. I know that whenever it's finally discovered, and it will be, the people who are doing it will undoubtedly say, oh, well, we did it for you folks. It's for the greater good of the greater number. It's for the society. It's probably to prevent global warming. Or maybe it's to inoculate people against some kind of a dreaded biological attack. We can't go around shooting everybody in the arm, but we can spray them and save their lives. You see how good we are? We're doing it for the benefit of society. I know they're going to, whatever it is, they're going to say it was for your good, but mine.
We put 90 million tons every day up there, and that's what's drying out the soil. 60% of the country in drought last year. That's what's contributing to the worsening of these fires in the West. West Nile virus, worst outbreak ever last year. Superstorm Sandy.
I mean, we have also launched an operation called My Weather, which gains access to the first truly personalized weather application for the web and mobile devices. You can go up on myweather.com and you can find out within a kilometer of where you are what is going to happen to the weather. It also gives a 10-day forecast. I think we've got to be aware that we're living in a time. I'm not going to get into the subject, which is a huge subject of climate change, but we do have variations of all sorts around the world. Certainly in England we have very precarious weather. We've had a drought up until about 10 days ago. And I think it is important to realize that you can use technology, which is offered by myweather.com, to tell you and be aware of what might happen to you.
Aircraft making a condensation trail is very similar in many ways to when you go outside on a cold day and exhale. You create a condensation trail. That little cloud is a condensation trail. Now, if you take a 2-mile walk on a cold day and you can turn around and you can see your condensation trail tracking all the way back for 2 miles. That's how crazy it is to think that what we're looking in the sky is actually condensation trail.
Okay, these previous guys, I've watched exactly what they do, and yes, they are correct. I've seen exactly the same stuff, so ditto marks on those. You want some figures? Okay, latest water test, tested the rain. 13,100 micrograms per liter of aluminum in the rain in 2013. Normally, it should be 0. So 13,100 is pretty damn much, folks. It used to be 0, then it was 100s in the 2000s, and then since 2010, it's into the 1,000s and the latest 13,100. In the snow on Mount Shasta, pristine Mount Shasta, 61,000 micrograms per liter, 4 times the amount that is found in the soil up there. Where in the hell is this stuff coming from if it's not coming from the soil?
We got things coming from sky down, and it's a huge, huge problem. Because as it comes down, what happens is a couple of things. Is that it actually is in our air, we breathe it. And as we breathe it, it's actually going to go up through our nostrils, into our brain, easiest access to our brain frontal lobe.
Believe me, I'm seriously concerned with what I'm watching. As a wildlife biologist, I've been watching the ecosystem collapse. When you lose all your stream organisms, when you have aluminum overload in your streams, you're killing your microbial bacteria and you're disrupting the entire ecosystem. So it goes way beyond just a little bit of pollution. How did Monsanto know to create aluminum-resistant plants? I don't think I've heard anybody ask that question. Okay.
Seed is treated with neonicotinoid pesticide, then coated with talc. The pesticide persists in the environment and in the plants, including the pollen, which bees carry back to the hive. Neonicotinoids bind irreversibly to the nicotinic acetylcholine receptors of an insect's central nervous system. It is claimed that once exposed to neonicotinoid pesticides, bees have trouble finding their hives and suffer a range of other detrimental effects, eventually resulting in the collapse of the hive.
Most of the people in this country have no idea what it takes to put the food on their table.
You think bees are underappreciated? Taken for granted?
Yeah, bees are underappreciated. Sometimes I think beekeepers are underappreciated.
In a good year, you can make $100,000 profit. But this past year has been a financial disaster. And it all began one afternoon last November when he checked on some of his hives in Florida.
When I pulled into a bee yard in Florida, there was 400 hives of bees that 3 weeks before that looked great. And all of a sudden, here we got roughly 400 beehives that are totally empty.
The bees were all gone.
They're gone.
I mean, where'd they go?
Don't know.
The bees, what about the bees? Is it farm chemicals? If it's farm chemicals, why are the bees just as dead 1,000 miles into the wilderness? Try to tell people this that are in the bee community. I've tried. Most won't listen. I've talked to some of the head people in the country. They want to stay in their cocoons. They've been taught and trained that unless it says in their peer-reviewed, establishment-approved manual that there's something going on in our skies, then it literally doesn't exist in their reality. The bee collapse disorder appears to be most directly related to geoengineering and the radio frequency signals. One more article, A World Without Bees. Einstein said, 4 years after the bees disappear, so will humans. We're on that track now. There are so many directions that the walls are closing in factors that lead back to geoengineering. So many roads lead back to geoengineering.
And crawled around. I mean, seriously, I got down on my hands and knees and crawled around. And there's no dead bees. There are no dead bees anywhere. I mean, you can't find any bees. They flew off someplace.
And never came back.
Never came home.
Had you ever seen that before?
No.
Tez günden ayırdı felek, eğlen sona gelin eğlen.
What is geoengineering all about for the new people a lot of new people who want to know what this is and why it's happening? Can you give us an introduction?
Yeah, again, the term geoengineering, aka chemtrails, that are the layman's term for what we see happening in the skies, but this is weather modification on a global scale. In fact, these programs are so large and so all-encompassing that all other weather modification programs that go on a smaller regional basis are they're negated by the scope and scale of the global geoengineering programs. And these programs involve a number of aspects. You have the saturation of the atmosphere with various chemical and metal particulates. And there appear to be various purposes and objectives with this saturation. In conjunction with this saturation, which ionizes the atmosphere, it makes the atmosphere more conductive, we have the HAARP facilities, High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. These are ionosphere heaters. Many have heard of the HAARP facilities. There's not just one or two or three. We believe there's at least 18 around the globe, possibly with 3 more being built in Antarctica right now. And once the atmosphere is saturated with these particulates, and then you add the ionosphere heaters, the entire weather system globally is virtually being thwarted. There is no natural weather at this point, and we really don't know what sort of climate conditions we would have necessarily if these programs were brought to a halt, and they desperately need to be brought to a halt, because the saturation of the atmosphere is thwarting the hydrological cycle. It's totally disrupting the rain cycle. Again, we have the artificially nucleated snowstorms, which I just mentioned. You can't go from 100 degrees to snow in one day without a whole lot of help. This includes jet stream manipulation with the HAARP facilities, and we are not guessing at this. We have monitoring sources for this signal, and we can see where the signal is most intense, and that's what steers the jet stream. So then you add artificial ice nucleation, which is a chemical nucleation process. They can turn what should have been rain into snow and drop the temperatures of these storm systems by this artificial chemical nucleation. This isn't sci-fi, this is hard science fact. The weather disseminating agencies are trying desperately, their task, and they're all owned at the very top, it appears, by the Rothschilds and or other parts of the global elite complex. Rothschilds in particular are ownership of Weather Channel, Weather Central, Weather Underground. And it was imperative that they own these agencies, otherwise there would be great discrepancy in trying to explain away these events.
So we're finding the aerosols, the metal particulates, the weather engineering, whether it's scalar, ionic, or orgone, or the chi of the atmosphere. All of those can be used and leveraged to create weather events that are several standard deviations or outside what would be typically normal. So the agenda was drought. The agenda was to kill the storm, at least in that one particular spot. You can kill a storm in place. That's easy to do with HAARP. You just change the polarization, you change the ionization of the atmosphere, and the storm will fall apart. And so it's very easy to add those particulates of aluminum, barium, and whatever else they want to put in there. And as you add heat to that, those particulates then radiate the heat into the atmosphere, and it warms. And we've got technologies available to us now that can do, continent-sized projects, is all of the persistent trails behind it. So that tells me, Michael, that they are engineering this storm to a great degree. Now, all of this stuff is chemtrail debris or chemtrail clouds that had been laid down over Utah and over southern Colorado earlier in the day. And if you control the weather, you're going to control the planet. It's that simple. The work we're doing will provide cover for others to come out. And I'm most interested in whistleblowers.
Tesla was an eccentric genius and was widely seen as the great rival to Thomas Edison.
Around 1891, Tesla invented the type of towering transformer coils still in use today to generate high voltage currents for studying electricity. It was Tesla who developed alternating current, the electrical current that we use to power our homes and appliances. It was also Tesla who put man on his quest to control the weather. He developed a chilling theory for controlling the weather using extremely low-frequency waves, or ELF waves. Tesla theorized that if ELF waves could be beamed into the ionosphere, in the upper reaches of the atmosphere, man could change the course of weather. The ELF waves would create heat, altering the molecular structure of the ionosphere, pushing it out into space.
When you heat a certain region of the ionosphere, it literally pushes it up and creates what would look like a column of space, and the lower atmosphere then rushes in to fill that space, and as it does, it changes the flow of jet streams within the region, pressure systems, and in that respect, it could manipulate weather.
What this means is the heated ionosphere acts like a giant dam, rerouting the path of the jet stream. The jet stream flows between 6 and 9 miles above the Earth's surface and reaches speeds up to 300 miles per hour.
The jet stream is a focused, high-velocity rope of air that moves billions of gallons of water around our world, like a giant river at 50, 60,000 feet up. It moves all the water around our world for rain, for storms. This is the lifeblood of planet Earth.
Could Tesla's theories help create a new generation of covert weather weapons?
It was the Russians that were creating this signal.
Perhaps it's already here. Between the years of 1988 and 1992, during the California drought, an anomaly occurs in the jet stream. The winds appear to change direction, blowing east to west instead of west to east, indicating the jet stream coming into the west is suddenly much weaker than normal, causing a drought. By 1995, the jet stream returns to normal. The Soviets deny any involvement in weather warfare.
One of the significant elements of weather warfare is the plausible deniability angle to it. You can't really attribute it to anyone at all because you don't know if it's just the weather or if it's some more sinister military application that you're being subjected to.
If you can trigger nature to do the work for you, you can raise covert wars, which our country and many others are famous for, and yet have the deniability that goes along with it.
Weather experts from NOAA and from the National Weather Service can't explain why the jet stream anomaly occurred. Still, it's no coincidence that the United States began building its own mysterious array of antennas in February 1992. They are located in Gakona, Alaska. The project is called HARP.
HARP is the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Project, originally a joint effort of the Air Force and Navy in cooperation with a number of academic institutions.
It is today the world's largest radio broadcasting station, but it's not designed to broadcast for human ears. It uses a unique patented ability to focus the energy coming out of the antenna field and injects that energy into a spot at the very top of the atmosphere in a region called the ionosphere.
HARP is comprised of 180 antennas, approximately 72 feet tall, linked together to function as one giant steerable antenna. Steerable because it can aim millions of watts of ELF waves into one tiny patch of the atmosphere.
The amount of energy we're talking about here is 3.6 million watts. To give you an idea of what that is, the largest legal AM radio station in North America is 50,000 watts. HARP is 72,000 50,000 watt radio stations injecting their entire output into a spot that's about 12 miles across by about 2.5 miles deep by about 90 miles up.
The Hyperspectral Radiography Sources program is seeking to develop a suite of laser-driven radiation sources. The common piece of all of these sources is an ultra-intense femtosecond laser pulse. To amplify the short pulse, one must first stretch the pulse in time by making some of the wavelengths of the pulse travel longer than others in a device called, appropriately enough, a pulse stretcher. The pulse then travels through an amplifier to boost its energy and is then sent through a pulse compressor that reverses the process of the pulse stretcher. The compressed pulse can contain over a joule of energy while still being less than 100 femtoseconds long. The resulting intensity approximates environments not seen outside the core of stars. These ultra-intense, ultra-short pulses will be used to seed radiation modules in the HRS program. A femtosecond laser pulse is sent into an optical cavity whose length is matched precisely to the round-trip time of the pulse. If the phase and timing of the next laser pulse matches the pulse that traveled around the cavity, the intensity of the two will add. Eventually, the light in the cavity becomes sufficiently intense to enable high harmonic generation, in which the electrons in the atoms of an inert gas jet scatter off the atomic core.
I had a friend, Nick Rockefeller, okay, who was one of the Rockefeller family, and we used to talk and share ideas and thoughts, and he's the one who told me 11 months before 9/11 ever happened that there was going to be an event. Never told him what the event was going to be, but there was going to be an event, and out of that event, we were going to invade Afghanistan to run pipelines from the Caspian Sea. We were going to invade Iraq, to take over the oil fields, establish a base in the Middle East, and make it all part of the New World Order. What's the end goal? And he said the end goal is to get everybody chipped, to control the whole society, to have the bankers, the elite people, the bankers and some governor controlling the world.
This is Building 7, a 47-story skyscraper that fell on the afternoon of September 11th.
The government says that fire brought it down. However, 1,500 architects and engineers concluded it was a controlled demolition.
Over 6,000 of my fellow service members have given their lives.
And thousands of my fellow first responders are dying.
I'm not a conspiracy theorist.
I'm a structural engineer.
I'm a New York City correction officer.
I'm an Air Force pilot.
I'm a father who lost his son.
We're Americans, and we deserve the truth.
Go to rememberbuilding7.org today.
There is this false competition between the left and the right perspective. We've got the masked raider with the black mask there in the wrestling ring, and then the guy comes in with the blue cape, and they go into this great phony wrestling match, and it's a great show. It's a great show, and they got cheerleaders, the commentators, on the left and the right, and the public enjoys the game. They like watching the match. It's exciting, isn't it? I mean, they throw each other out of the ring, they beat each other up. He's up, he's down. No, he's winning. No, he's losing. Well, he lost this match, but he'll be back next week. Stay tuned, folks, for the next match. A grudge match is coming back, and so forth. This is American politics that we're talking about. Both of these professional wrestlers, they beat each other up a little bit in the wrestling match, and they go in the locker room and they pat each other on the back and go out and have a beer together and say, well, that was a pretty good show. What are we going to do next week? This is American politics. And we have our cheerleaders, the news commentators and the talk show hosts on the left and on the right. And they frame the debate. They won't let the American people debate the real issues. They won't let them even think about the real issues, which are we going to keep American sovereignty or not? Are we going to let the Federal Reserve System, which is a banking cartel, continue to run our government or not? They won't let us talk about those things. So that's the problem. As long as we depend on the phony wrestlers and depend upon their well-paid cheerleaders in the media to keep us focused on secondary issues, we're never going to get out of this mess. So the first thing is to recognize the problem, see who the opposition is, and then walk away from them.
All the power is in the people. And to the extent that government becomes alienated from the people, does things that people don't want, power is transferred until you finally come to a police state, totalitarian state, whatever word you want to give it, where the desires of the people really have no consequence. They go out and they vote. Doesn't make any difference which candidate they elect.
I'm a programmer. I worked for NASA, worked for ExxonMobil, worked for
or Department of Transportation.
Mr. Curtis, are there programs that can be used to secretly fix elections?
Yes.
How do you know that to be the case?
Because in October, Tom Feeney at the company I work for in Oviedo, Florida, that did just that.
And when you say did just that, it would rig an election?
It would flip the vote 51-49 to whoever you wanted it to go to and whichever race you wanted to win.
And would that program that you designed be something that elections officials that might be on county boards of elections could detect?
They'd never see it.
So how would such a program, a secret program that fixes the election, how could it be detected?
You would have to view it either in the source code, or you'd have to have a receipt and then count the hard paper against the actual vote total. Other than that, you won't see it.
Given the availability of such vote rigging software and the testimony that has been given under oath of substantial statistical anomalies and gross differences between exit polling data and the actual tabulated results, do you have an opinion whether or not the Ohio election, presidential election, was hacked?
Yes, I would say it was.
So in other words, there is absolutely no assurance whatsoever in anything with regard to these machines?
Absolutely none.
Anybody who trusts electronic voting machines should have their head examined.
Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Jenny. I'm a sophomore, and this is for all three of you. Can you say in one sentence or less what... you know what I mean. Can you say why America is the greatest country in the world?
Diversity and opportunity.
Lewis?
Freedom and freedom. So let's keep it that way.
Will?
The New York Jets.
No, I'm going to hold you to an answer on that. What makes America the greatest country in the world?
Well, Lewis and Sharon said it. Diversity and opportunity and freedom and freedom.
I'm not letting you go back to the airport without answering the question.
Well, our Constitution is a masterpiece. James Madison was a genius. The Declaration of Independence is, for me, the single greatest piece of American writing. You don't look satisfied.
One's a set of laws and the other's a declaration of war. I want a human moment from you. What about the people? Why is America
not the greatest country in the world, Professor. That's my answer.
You're saying...
Yes.
Let's talk about...
Fine. Sharon, the NEA is a loser. Yeah, it accounts for a penny out of her paycheck, but he gets to hit you with it anytime he wants. It doesn't cost money. It costs votes. It costs airtime and column inches. You know why people don't like liberals? Because they lose. If liberals are so fucking smart, how come they lose so goddamn always?
Hey.
And with a straight face, you're going to tell students that America is so star-spangled awesome that we're the only ones in the world who have freedom? Canada has freedom. Japan has freedom. The UK, France, Italy, Germany, Spain, Australia, Belgium has freedom. So 207 sovereign states in the world, like 180 of them have freedom.
All right.
And yeah, you, sorority girl, just in case you accidentally wander into a voting booth one day, there's some things you should know. And one of them is,
There is absolutely no evidence to support the statement that we're the greatest country in the world. We're 7th in literacy, 27th in math, 22nd in science, 49th in life expectancy, 178th in infant mortality, 3rd in median household income, number 4 in labor force, and number 4 in exports. We lead the world in only 3 categories: number of incarcerated citizens per capita, number of adults who believe angels are real, and defense spending, where we spend more than the next 26 countries combined, 25 of whom are allies. Now, none of this is the fault of a 20-year-old college student, but you nonetheless are, without a doubt, a member of the worst generation ever. So when you ask what makes us the greatest country in the world, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Yosemite? Sure used to be. We stood up for what was right. We fought for moral reasons. We passed laws, struck down laws for moral reasons. We waged wars on poverty, not poor people. We sacrificed. We cared about our neighbors. We put our money where our mouths were, and we never beat our chest. We built great big things, made ungodly technological advances, explored the universe, cured diseases, and we cultivated the world's greatest artists and the world's greatest economy. We reached for the stars, acted like men. We aspired to intelligence. We didn't belittle it. It didn't make us feel inferior. We didn't identify ourselves by who we voted for in the last election, and we didn't scare so easy. We were able to be all these things and do all these things because we were informed by great men, men who were revered. First step in solving any problem is recognizing there is one. America is not the greatest country in the world anymore.
I had this really uncomfortable feeling in the pit of my stomach as I was thinking to myself, how did America transform itself from being a truly free country with a servant government where our individual rights were protected by our Constitution to being a country that talked about being free but really wasn't? The change started when the Federal Reserve came into existence and America adopted one of the major planks of the Communist Manifesto by bringing to America this central bank. The very same people that backed the Federal Reserve System also backed the graduated income tax, a second plank from the Communist Manifesto. You know that the Federal Reserve is a private bank and not a government agency?
No, I wasn't aware of that.
It's a private bank? That would scare me quite a bit.
What if you learned that the Federal Reserve makes money off the taxes you pay? How would you feel about that?
Angry. Like I'm feeling right now.
I would feel cheated by my government.
I'd be angry.
It kind of sucks. They're pretty much in control of everything.
I decided to drive back to Washington to see Dr. Ron Paul. He had been a congressman for over 20 years. I had met him previously in 1998 when I was running for governor of Nevada, and I knew him to be an honest and sincere man, and I thought he'd be very helpful in letting me know what the future holds for the American people. Who owns the Federal Reserve?
It's secret, and we can't find out what's happening. But the Congress created it, and it's not authorized in the Constitution.
The government borrows money from a private corporation using the name Federal that prints United States on it, and then it pays back to the Fed, which is owned by private banks. We don't know who all those private banks are. The money that the government is paying back to the private bankers is the money that comes from you and me. Why in the world would the American government borrow money and pay fees on it
when it has the authority to make the money itself interest-free.
The Federal Reserve is no more federal than Federal Express. I've never seen a full list of ownership for the Fed. I don't think anybody has.
The government works for a private bank, and the private bank works for its owners, the true masters.
People talk to me about, the issue of Republican versus Democrat, as if they don't get it. And I say, look, here's the way you get it. It's organized crime. All you do is you call the Republicans the Genoveses, and you call the Democrats the Gambinos. The people at the top, they treat it like a crap game, like it's their crap game, like they're making lots of money. Occasionally somebody at the table shoots each other, but the moment anything threatens their crap game, they all unite to protect it. They're both controlled by the same financial, economic, and corporate interests.
Once the banks get into the picture and they form a partnership with the government gives them the legal power now to create bank-issued money backed by the coercive power of government to require everybody to accept that bank money.
In the course of the last century, they have converted this nation from a nation of independent freeholders to a nation of employees. And they're just one step away from being serfs.
Most people spend the great bulk of their money for taxes, interest, and inflation. And all of that money goes to these two groups that comprise the cartel and their partner, the federal government. It's not a coincidence.
So if Congress used its legal authority to shut down the Federal Reserve System, the American people would be much better off.
When President Reagan was elected, one of the first things that he did was appoint a blue ribbon panel of business people headed by Peter Grace, and is commonly referred to as the Grace Commission. And their job was to research all the various areas of the federal government and make a report. One of the quotes from the Grace Commission is, 100% of what is collected is absorbed solely by interest on the federal debt. All individual income tax revenues are gone before 1 nickel is spent on the services taxpayers expect from government. Brainwashed. People have been told, that you need this income tax system to fund government, which is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, my question is, well, if that's true, how did we fund government from 1776 to 1913?
The main purpose of the income tax is not to raise revenue, but to redistribute wealth and to control society.
A lot of people might say, well, gee, if there wasn't an income tax, what would happen to education? They don't understand that education is paid for the most part, out of state and local taxes, your property tax. People might say, well, how are we going to build and maintain our highways? If there's no money coming into the government, we need our highways. There is a tax on every gallon of gasoline that people buy. Proceeds from the income tax do not pay for highway construction. The amount of money that we spend on defense is exactly equal to the amount of corporate income tax, which is quite legal and quite constitutional.
I think we should not want the income tax for several reasons. One is that it is the instrument of totalitarianism. It is the means by which the government can manipulate people and put you into a condition of servitude.
Every year you give the federal government a form that says, here's how all my money worked. If you lie, you could go to prison. So you're required to give them a financial statement that under, the force of law could put you in prison if it's not impeccable, right? And under the law, they're supposed to do the same. They're supposed to give you back a financial statement that says, here's what we did with your money. Except you comply and they don't. In fiscal 99, the Department of Defense had 1.1 trillion of undocumentable adjustments. The following year, they had 2.3 trillion of undocumentable adjustments.
Well, one of the things they told me was that he was at the house one night, and we were talking, and he started laughing. He said, "Aaron, what do you think women's liberation was about?" And I said, I had pretty conventional thinking about it at that point. I said, I think it's about women having the right to work, getting equal pay with men, just like they won the right to vote, you know? And he started to laugh. He said, "You're an idiot." And I said, "Why am I an idiot?" He said, let me tell you what that was about. We, the Rockefellers, funded that. We funded Women's Lib, you know? And we're the ones who got all over the newspapers and television, the Rockefeller Foundation. He says, and you want to know why? He says, there were two primary reasons. And they were, one reason was we couldn't tax half the population before Women's Lib. And the second reason was, now we get the kids in school at an early age. We can indoctrinate the kids how to think. It breaks up the family. The kids start looking at the state as the family, as the school, as the officials, as their family, not as the parents teaching them. And so those are the two primary reasons for Women's Lib, which I thought up to that point was a noble thing. You know, when I saw their intentions behind it, where they were coming from when they created it, the thought of it, I saw the evil behind what I thought was a noble venture.
What's your name?
Jan Crafting?
Hi, Jan. I'm Aaron Russo. I produced the movie Trading.
Is this a joke? Am I going to
No, it's not a joke. Okay. No. I produced the movie Trading Places with Eddie Murphy and The Rose with Bette Midler. Many movies. I'm doing a feature film. And my film is about my quest to find out whether or not people pay income taxes. Do you pay an income tax?
Yes, I do.
You do? Yeah. Have you ever seen a law that requires you to pay an income tax?
Have I ever read it? Do you mean in the page, black and white? No,
Yeah.
no.
So you pay the income tax, I assume?
Of late. Well, actually, no, I didn't file last year, but... Okay. I'm sorry, is this on film? No, I paid my taxes.
My question to you is, have you ever seen a law that says you have to pay an income tax?
The law is that guy that wears that badge and a gun. That's the one that puts you in jail. That's the law.
Actually, I can't stand the IRS. Okay. They're evil. Do you have any fear of the IRS?
Not really, because I'm Canadian.
I think it's actually unconstitutional, is what I've heard. But to avoid any hassle, I pay it.
If there was no law and I wasn't afraid of them coming and taking me to jail, absolutely, I wouldn't pay taxes.
Okay, then no, I wouldn't pay income taxes.
It's a no-brainer. You wouldn't pay it.
I wouldn't pay it.
Why would anybody?
Because that's what they tell us we must do, else we're bad Americans.
Would you pay it?
No.
Would you pay it?
No.
Why would you pay taxes if you're an actor?
The income tax is not legal because it would be a direct tax and it is not apportioned as the Constitution demands.
If it's against the Constitution, then why are we doing it?
I really expected that, of course, there's a law that you can point to in the law book, the code, that requires you to file a tax return. Of course there is. Maybe I don't know what it is right then as he was speaking to me, but sure. So naively, I agreed to go off and research it and get back to him. 3.5 months later, I was at that point where I couldn't find the statute that clearly made a person liable, at least not me and most people I know, and I had no choice in my mind except to resign.
I had to leave the IRS because I presented evidence that I had accumulated indicating that the agency was violating the law and violating people's rights. And I asked the agency for a response to my sincere concerns. And the answer I got was that they would not respond to my concerns and that they would provide me with the paperwork necessary to tender my resignation.
But We the People Foundation for Constitutional Education put a full-page ad in the USA Today on July 7, 2000. And within the body of that ad was a $50,000 challenge for anyone that could show the law. And to me, $50,000 is a lot of money. So I went after that and did the research based on the fact that I thought, let's put this baby to bed. I'm hearing all these rumors. You know, I'm going to kill two birds with one stone. I'll answer these people's questions that are asking me, and then I'll win this $50,000. And, you know, based on the research that I did throughout the year 2000 and that I'm still doing, I have not found that law. I've asked Congress. We've asked a lot of people in the IRS commissioners, helpers. They can't answer, because if they answer, the American people are going to know that this whole thing is a fraud.
I was surprised to hear these highly trained and decorated IRS agents telling me there was no law requiring American citizens to file a 1040 or to pay an income tax on their labor.
I haven't filed an federal income tax return since I left.
I have not filed a tax return since 1999. Approximately 67 million people don't file an income tax return.
Why do you think you've been able to get away with not paying or filing your income taxes for so long?
Well, first of all, I've not gotten away with anything. I'm not hiding from anyone. I'm simply asking the IRS to show me the laws that apparently require me to do these things, and they are suspiciously reticent to answer questions from me. And of course, there are millions of other people, many other organizations who have attempted to get answers. They act very suspiciously when asked to simply sit down at the table with the American people and discuss what their obligations are. Rather than pulling up a chair, they pull out a club.
I'm on the wrong side of heaven. On October 29, 2010, the United Nations Convention in Nagoya in Japan reached a landmark consensus decision. The 193-member UN Convention on Biological Diversity closed its 10th biennial meeting with a de facto moratorium on geoengineering projects and experiments. Any private or public experimentation or adventurism intended to manipulate the planetary thermostat will be in violation of this carefully crafted UN consensus. So, 193 countries are therefore fully aware of the chemtrailing programs. And no government can deny this knowledge anymore.
What's going on up there doesn't scare you. You're not paying attention. Are we going to sit here and say nothing and do nothing? I know it's polluting the bay. It's killing the animals. Sea mammals. It's killing you. Your mama, your daddy, your sister, your brother, your mother. I mean, they're all going to have problems with their hearts, the respiratory system. You gag, you cough. This should be a nice clean day. But the stuff is coming down to infest us and infect us. Senility, that poison, that toxin that hits you every day, every hour. And it's going on, there's a war against the planet Earth. It's going on up there. It's an aerosol. A toxic dump. It's a damn emergency. Oh, the chemical, sulfur hexafluoride. It changes something in the synapse. I don't know exactly how it works in the brain, but they know. These are the Dr. Frankensteins of the world.
Strontium. Strontium is what they use in neuroscience.
Oh, well, there's strontium. Marshall says strontium.
It replaces calcium in your neurotransmitters, so you're easier to manipulate.
Ed, you've produced a very disturbing picture. You've disturbed me greatly. I mean, I watch these films at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm concerned as hell that you may be on to the biggest crime in the century, in the 2 centuries, in the history of the world against humanity itself. Am I overreacting when I take a look up there day after day after day in Santa Cruz, and I hear about it in Santa Barbara? I see it off of Catalina Island with some sort of rocket going up, and people are saying, oh, it's nothing to worry about. I hear the planes going overhead. My God, maybe they're doing another dump on us. And it's really death dumps on a daily basis. Maybe not happening instantaneously, but what is am I going too far?
Anthony, I don't think you're going too far at all. I think that the way you've described it is in terms of the greatest crime of all history, the greatest crime of all history, crime against humanity, crime against humanity, crime against humanity. I don't think that's too strong a statement at all. And the reason it's, I think, very rational statement is that we know that they are spraying something toxic on us. There's no longer any question. We know that they are spraying something toxic on us. There's no longer any question. They always say, well, it's just water vapor, of course, but we now know it's not just water vapor. And we know that it's very toxic. It's affecting human health. It's affecting plant life, wildlife. And it could damage the ecosystem and the human race for centuries. And it could damage the ecosystem and the human race for centuries, if not forever. Some of these genetic changes that may come about from these things. It could be irreversible, we don't know. It could be irreversible, we don't know.
Well, it can kill the sea mammals, the sea otters and the seals, the porpoises, the whales. It can kill the fish. It's poisoning the water. It's dropping the trees and making them non-functional. I mean, they're dying everywhere. And it's happening at a very rapid speed. Or am I, again, I can exaggerate at times,
Well, no, I don't think you're exaggerating, and that's the reason we produced this documentary, is because it's so far removed from what most people think is reality. It's shocking to discover.
In 1990, the Department of Defense published a chemtrails manual for pilot training at the United States Air Force Academy. In the mid-90s, unmarked military aircraft were observed spraying aerosols from ports located in the wings and around the exhaust of jet engines. In recent years, civilian aircraft are increasingly contracted to secretly spray aerosols through ports located near the engines and airframe. We'll attempt to use this video to identify the commercial carriers and point out the evidence of aerosol spraying. Ask yourself, If global warming is real, why are these aircraft secretly spraying aerosols that are known by IPCC scientists to warm the climate? Aerosol spraying is immediately obvious here, with no invisible gap between the engine and the visible trail. More importantly, we see a leak in the aerosol container inside the belly of the aircraft that is causing an intermittent third trail to be left behind. Notice as the camera pans back through the trail, how the aerosols look dirty in color. They are almost brown. These are not aerosols that will reflect light back into space. These are aerosols that warm the climate. We see no gap between the engine and the visible trail. Also notice that the trail is bifurcated, as if the aerosols are coming from two different sources inside the engine. This aircraft shows us more dirty trails that will not reflect sunlight back into space. Also notice the bifurcated trails, as if the aerosols are coming from two different sources inside the engine. Once again, no gap between the engine and the visible trail, and the bifurcation of the trails. These jet trails look almost like normal contrails, except the distance between the engine and the visible trail is far too short, and you can see the clumps of particulates ejected. As in the previous example, the distance between the engine and the trails is far too short. Aerosol sprayed from one jet to the next are not necessarily the same ingredients. If you think these trails are normal contrails, you'll have to explain how a hot jet engine can spray ice crystals directly out of the jet engine exhaust.
Thank you very much, Richard, and I am delighted to be here in these new headquarters. I have been often to, I guess, the mothership in New York City, but it's good to have an outpost of the council right here down the street from the State Department. We get a lot of advice from the council, so this will mean I won't have as far to go to be told what we should be doing and how we should think about the future.
Specific about when you met Rockefeller, how it happened in these discussions?
I met Rockefeller through a female attorney I knew who called me up one day and said, one of the Rockefellers would like to meet you. I had made a video called Mad as Hell, and he'd seen the video and wanted to meet me and knew I was running for governor of Nevada. So sure, I'd love to meet him. And I met him and I liked him, and he was a very, very smart man. And we used to talk and share ideas and thoughts. And he's the one who told me 11 months before 9/11 ever happened that there was going to be an event. Never told me what the event was going to be, but there was going to be an event. And out of that event, we were going to invade Afghanistan to run pipelines from the Caspian Sea. We were going to invade Iraq, you know, to take over the oil fields, establish a base in the Middle East, and make it all part of the New World Order. And we go after Chavez in Venezuela. And sure enough, later 9/11 happened. And I remember he was telling me how how you're gonna see soldiers looking in caves for people in Afghanistan and Pakistan and all these places. And there's gonna be this war on terror, which is no real enemy. And the whole thing is a giant hoax. You know, but it's a way for the government to take over the American people.
He told you it was going to be a hoax.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. There's no question. How could there be a war on terror and actually say that we're having a war against terrorism and leave the borders wide open? If you were the President of the United States, or I were the President of the United States, and 9/11 really happened the way they want us to believe it happened, the first thing you would do is shut down the borders so people couldn't get in the country to harm you. But they left the borders wide open because the bankers want the borders open because they want a one-world government. They want a North American Union. They don't want borders here. The 9/11 was only a manifestation. It was done to create a fear in the American public, right? So that we will obey what they want us to do. And take Richard Reed, the shoe bomber. Here's a guy who was 6'6", ugly as could be. I heard he smelled. Okay, he sits in coach on a plane, lighting matches to put his shoe on fire, surrounded by people. It's idiotic. If you were going to blow up a plane, you go into the bathroom, you close the door, and you put your shoe on fire. You're not going to sit there surrounded by people lighting matches on a no-smoking flight. They want you to believe this nonsense. It's ridiculous.
7/7's come out now, and the majority of the British people think it's an inside job, and all the evidence points towards it being an inside job.
Yeah, I mean, what happened in London?
Yes.
All this is nonsense. It's just keep people in fear. It's this endless war on terrorism that doesn't really exist, so people will submit to whatever the government wants them to submit to. Searches, check your shoes, have ID cards, put chips in you, you know, where you become servants to the elite. That's what this is all about, you know? Restore America's republic to what it's supposed to be, get the bankers out of our government, get the bankers out of our government. Government should stop borrowing money from the banks. Government should make its own money, restore the republic, individual freedoms. That's what this country's about. And until we do that, we're gonna be slaves. I mean, to me, I see people like Bill O'Reilly on television, right? And I see how much they control the media. Like there's this girl on Bill O'Reilly the other night from an organization saying the world can't wait. And this girl was spot on. Everything she was saying was the truth. And all Bill O'Reilly could do was call her a lunatic. He couldn't challenge the facts. They just call people names. They can't, and until we just find that, look, this world, we're heading into a world of danger, possible nuclear wars, you know, because the banking industry is trying to take over the world. 9/11 is the beginning of the war on terror. That war on terror is leading us into Iraq, which is the next lie. So you had the lie of 9/11, how that happened. Nobody knows how Building 7 came down. Okay, we know 9/11 was a fraud. The American people don't know it, but more and more of them are believing it. Okay, so that was the first lie. Besides the inception, I'm not going back to the inception of the Federal Reserve, that original lie. But 9/11 was the first lie in this present state we're in. 9/11 is the kickoff of the war against the American people and the people of the world. 9/11 was a phony. It's a fraud. It didn't happen the way they told us it happened. Now, because of 9/11, we then had the authority to go into Afghanistan and Iraq. Iraq didn't have weapons of mass destruction. Okay, so that was the next lie. Now they're talking about going into Iran. Now, how would you feel if you were Iran and you had this big, powerful country, America, go into your next door neighbor, take over their oil fields, right? Wouldn't you be worried that what they were going to do to you? Of course you're going to be worried. But the people of America don't think about it from Iran's point of view. They think about it from our point of view. So now we're going to send more troops into Iraq and keep building up because they want Iraq and the Middle East to become part of the New World Order.
This one's for Larry Silverstein. Last time we talked, sir, I asked you if you could address some of the 9/11 conspiracy theories that you're accused of. Sadly, your response has actually invited more of them. I mean, for the record, everybody knows your infamous comments on PBS where you said pull Building 7 on 5/25 on the day of 9/11.
They were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. I said, you know, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
Your official response was that it was the firefighters. My question is, it was pretty clear that you meant the building, and if it was the firefighters, they already are outside the building by 12 because the water lines were broken.
Ask the question.
And the fire chief that you said you spoke to, Fire Chief Negro, denies talking to you on that day of 9/11. Can you answer those questions and address the theories against you?
I suggest to everybody's consideration that we all look at the thousands of pages of testimony that have been rendered in the many years since 9/11, and let's use today's session for something that's...
Are you aware of testimony of bombs in the building before the building collapsed, sir? Are you aware of that testimony? Sir, there's testimony by Barry Jennings. Sir, you don't have to touch me. Listen, I'll walk away. All I'm asking is a question. I don't have to be kicked out. It's a legitimate question. You don't have to put your hands on me. But all I'm saying is, no, I'm not. I'm here asking. The question was not answered. That's why I have a grievance. Larry Silverstein was told not to come into work. That's why him, his daughter, and his son never showed up to work on 9/11. He put an insurance policy on the buildings. Reporters, do your job, please. Ask some questions.
Toward world collectivist government has been going on for quite a while. It's impossible to establish its absolute origin, but it certainly was part of the literature at the turn of the last century. And there were groups and organizations forming in various parts of the world at that time. Through World War I really got up to speed, and then finally in World War II, all of the major players on the world scene were talking about world government. They tried to do the League of Nations, that failed. Finally they created the United Nations, that stuck. And so now they're just trying to pump up the United Nations into the framework of the global government that they have always envisioned. And this has been a thing that goes beyond one generation. It's transgenerational. In other words, it's not just one person's vision. The people that started it are long gone, but those who inherited it continue this dream. To them, I'm sure they look at it as a wonderful thing. They see it as an end of nationhood, as it has been historically defined. They see that as advantageous, they say, because it'll put an end to war and so forth. And they can sell the idea as a great step toward brotherhood and a unified globe and so forth. They use all of these things to make it sound good. But when you start examining the actual policies that they're instituting, it's not so hot. It's based on the principle of collectivism, as I've said several times, and that means it's all-powerful government. It's a tyrannical government. It's the same kind of a system that Adolf Hitler had in mind. And we fought a war to destroy him and his system. The same kind of a system that Joseph Stalin had in mind, and we fought a Cold War and did a lot of other things to make sure that that didn't happen. The same kind of a system that Mao Zedong had in mind, and Benito Mussolini. All of the great collectivists of history have had this unified global government based on the model of collectivism as their goal, and we fought against it until recently. Now we are actually the greatest advocates of it ourselves. We don't call it tyranny. We don't call it fascism or Nazism or communism. We have a better name for it. The name they have chosen is the New World Order. That's their favorite phrase for it. But when you examine its nature and its essence, it is a collectivist system, powerful government, little people at the bottom taking orders. So this is the concept. It's been under evolution for over 100 years. It looks like it's coming within sight now.
Here is part one of our interview with Alan Watt. Alan is an author, radio host, and deep researcher into the New World Order's long-term strategy of eugenics and more.
I'm Alan Watt, and I've been following politics and geopolitics for a good part of my life. I didn't start off deliberately going out to find out everything that was possibly going on. In fact, I had no idea, to be honest with you, how vast the scale of an agenda, political agenda, is when you're bringing in a global society. Wars have many different purposes. Economics is only simply one big part of it, but cultural change and the building of empire through the defeated nations joining in leagues. Every country was basically signing the same laws, and had been my whole life, at the same time, that affected their societies. Laws were introduced and bills were introduced unbeknownst to the people in those countries that it was being introduced in their neighboring countries or even across the water somewhere at the same time. I realized there was already a governmental control, obviously, that coordinated all of this, and it led me into the United Nations. For every single department of government you have on a federal, local, county, state, provincial level, the United Nations had an equivalent department to deal with everything. It was already set up, in fact, to be global government. H.G. Wells said at the League of Nations, which was the embryo for the United Nations, he said, this is the nucleus of the world governments, when eventually all laws will come from there, be passed and signed into law by treaty of all the member countries. Eventually, we won't even have to go through the farce, and that's what it is, of voting in parties or candidates, because in the latter part of the 20th century, And now into the 21st century, we're being trained, rather obviously, to simply accept rule by experts, rule by scientists, rule by professionals. And that's what they mean when they call governance. That's the term used.
There are certain issues that people on the left and the right in American politics will never discuss. And the reason they won't discuss them is because they agree mutually. The Democrats and the Republicans agree on something, so they don't want to talk about it in public debate because it reveals the fact that they're basically the same. They only talk about things on which they disagree. Turns out that the things on which they agree are the most important things. The things in which they disagree are relatively minor. So the things in which they agree are, for example, our foreign policy. They both agree that the desired goal eventually is to move the United States into world government. Not just any world government, but a world government based on the model of collectivism. In other words, big, powerful, centralized world government. If it were a world government based on the principles of freedom and freedom of choice, freedom of culture, low intervention, if no intervention in the lives of normal human beings, it might be a wonderful thing, but that's not the kind of world government the left and the right have in mind. They're talking about total world government with all major decisions being made at the top and people at the bottom being essentially living in a feudalist society, just serfs and peasants, basically, in a high-tech feudalism. And the left and the right both agree with that goal, and so they never discuss it in public debate. Another thing in which they agree is the dominance of the banking system in our economy and, to a large extent, in our politics. They both agree that the banks are supreme, that the banks must be protected, that the banks must be funded, they must be bailed out, they must not be allowed to fail. When the banks make bad loans to third world countries, or if they make bad loans to large corporations, both the Republicans and the Democrats agree that we must come in with taxpayers' money, either tax money or inflation money, and we must bail out the banks. And we do that, they both agree, by giving the money to these corporations and giving the money to the third world countries so that they can continue to make interest payments to the banks. So those are two major issues, I would say perhaps the largest issues we could possibly face. And so we find that Republicans and Democrats are in agreement on that. You might add another third topic if you wish, and that is our role in the Middle East. Both parties talk alternately about, we've got to end this war in the Middle East, pull our troops home, and all that sort of thing. But that's just rhetoric. You notice we go from one party to the other. The war continues, the war grows, the funding continues. So there we have three major issues, perhaps the three largest issues of all. And there's no debate between Republicans and Democrats as to what to do. Though there may be some debate in rhetoric, they may give speeches, but when it's time to vote in Congress, there is no division between them at all. And this itself should be the biggest giveaway as to what the reality of politics is today. If anybody that's got their eyes open, they ought to be able to see it just by examining those three issues.
A reading from Memoirs by David Rockefeller. Okay, this is from a section called Proud Internationalist under the heading Populist Paranoia. For more than a century, ideological extremists at either end of the political spectrum have seized upon well-publicized incidents such as my encounter with Castro to attack the Rockefeller family for the inordinate influence they claim we wield over American political and economic institutions. Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as, quote, internationalists, and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I am proud of it. You go through and look at some of the other headers in this chapter. You've got the Council on Foreign Relations. You've got Bilderberg. Oh, this is really good. Underneath Bilderberg, it says, if the Council on Foreign Relations raises the hackles of conspiracy theorists, the Bilderberg meetings must induce apocalyptic visions of omnipotent international bankers plotting with unscrupulous government officials to impose cunning schemes on an ignorant and unsuspecting world.
If they're really involved in, quote, conspiracies on the international level, all you have to do is go to the admission after the smarmy paragraph you pointed out about Bilderberg, about how it gives people apocalyptic visions, read about, well, is Bilderberg involved in insider trading? Are they involved in scheming? Do they plan things at their meetings? In 1976, Bilderberg faced a scandal that almost resulted in its collapse. In that year, in testimony before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, it was alleged that Prince Bernhard, that's the founder of Bilderberg and the Prince of the Netherlands, Prince Bernhard had approached the Lockheed Corporation with an offer to use his position to influence the Dutch defense procurement policies in return for significant financial consideration. As the year wore on, the evidence against Bernhard accumulated, including indications he had met with intermediaries during Bilderberg events. The 1976 conference was canceled, and it appeared for a time that Bilderberg was finished. But Bilderberg's not involved in plotting anything. They're just there doing stuff. And here they are talking about the reactionaries and some Italian groups. But on the next page, where they talk about trade barriers and protectionism, they're talking about their role in GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. They're also involved in the World Trade Organization, NAFTA, you name it.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders. It is a big idea, a new world order, a world in which there is the very real prospect of a new world order.
After 1989, President Bush said, and it's a phrase that I often use myself, that we needed a new world order.
There is a chance for the President of the United States to use this disaster to carry out what his father, a phrase his father used, I think, only once, and hasn't been used since, and that is a new world order.
So that the problem of the Bush presidency will be the emergence of a new international order.
Within the next 4 years, we will see the emergence of a new international order.
The beginning of a new international order.
The pieces are in flux. Soon they will settle again. Before they do, let us reorder this world around us.
I think its task will be to develop an overall strategy for America in this period when really a new world order can be created. It's a great opportunity. It isn't just a crisis.
It's about the future of Europe and a new world order.
There's a need for a new world order, but it has different characteristics in different parts of the world.
But today, with Asia already outproducing Europe, India and China are clearly becoming part of our new order.
We are now facing a common challenge. And the challenge is how to build a world order for the first time in history on a global basis.
So, in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, a new world is emerging. It is a new world order with significantly different and radically new challenges.
The affirmative task we have now is to actually create a new world order.
Good evening, everybody. President Obama and British Prime Minister Gordon today calling for a new world order to tackle our global economic crisis.
And the president outlined his vision of a new world order in which the U.S. would participate fully.
We've got to give them a stake in creating the kind of world order that I think all of us would like to see.
So I see a world order in the future with a multipolar world order.
I think a new world order is emerging, and with it the foundations of a new and progressive era of international cooperation.
But in a globalized economy, we are going to have to take global responsibilities, and there is going to have to be some semblance of global governance.
Never before has a new world order had to be assembled from so many different perceptions or on so global a scale. Nor has any previous order had to combine the attributes of the historic balance of power system with global democratic opinion and the exploding technology of the contemporary period.
And I strongly believe India will be a central actor in the new world order.
There also exists an extraordinary opportunity to form for the first time in history a truly global society.
2009 is also the first year of global governance, with the establishment of the G20 in the middle of the financial crisis. The climate conference in Copenhagen is another step towards the global management of our planet.
New World Order is the headline in the Globe and Mail in Canada.
Is this global governance at last? Is it one world, the central bankers in charge? But aren't we all just living and dying for what the central banks do?
Of course we are. We are absolutely slaves to central banks.
And for the international order that we have worked for generations to build. Ordinary men and women are too small-minded to govern their own affairs. That order and progress can only come when individuals surrender their rights to an all-powerful sovereign.
Is that through the Federal Reserve System, the bankers have pretty much taken control of our government. It doesn't matter Republican and Democrat anymore, because they're both the same. Neither one of them are talking about shutting down the Federal Reserve System or stopping the payment of taxes, or any of the big issues that face Americans, right? So I had a friend, Nick Rockefeller, okay, who was one of the Rockefeller family, and he, when I was running for governor in Nevada, he came to me, introduced himself to me through an attorney, and we became friends. We started talking about things, and I learned an awful lot from Mr. Rockefeller. And one of the things that we used to talk about was the ultimate plan of the banking industry, what they wanted to accomplish. And the goals of the banking industry, not just the Federal Reserve System, but the private banks in Germany and England, all over Italy, all over the world, they all work together. They're all central banks, and they're all part of the Communist Manifesto. You know, central banking is one of the major planks of the Communist Manifesto. We talk about America being a capitalistic country, but yet at the same time we have a central bank that plans everything for us, right? And the graduated income tax is another plank of the Communist Manifesto, right? So right there you have two major planks of the Communist Manifesto that have been brought in because of the Federal Reserve System, okay? So the ultimate goal that these people have in mind is the goal to create a one world government run by the banking industry, run by the bankers, and they're doing it in sections. The European currency, the euro, and the European Constitution is one part of it. Now they're trying to do it in America with the North American Union, right? And they want to create a new currency called the Amero, right? And the whole agenda is to create a one world government where everybody has an RFID chip implanted in them. All money is to be in those chips, right? There'll be no more cash. And this is given me straight from Rockefeller himself. This is what they want to accomplish. And all money will be in your chips. And so instead of having cash, anytime you have money in your chip, they can take out whatever they want to take out whenever they want to. If they say you owe us this much money in taxes, they just deduct it out of your chip digitally.
Total control.
Total control. And if you're like me or you, and you're protesting what they're doing, they can just turn off your chip. And you have nothing. You can't buy food. You can't do anything. It's total control of the people.
And that chip's connected to a database that has your purchasing records, what you do, what
everything.
You sell.
Everything is in there, you know? And so they want a one world government controlled by them, everybody being chipped, all your money in those chips, and they control the chips, and they control people. And you become a slave. You become a serf to these people. That's their goal. That's their intentions.
Ryan's going to open this conversation on behalf of us.
Thank you. Look, we agree on the problem here, and the problem is health inflation is driving us off of a fiscal cliff. Mr. President, you said healthcare reform is budget reform. You're right. We agree with that. Medicare right now has a $38 trillion unfunded liability. That's $38 trillion in empty promises to my parents' generation, our kids' generation. Medicaid's growing at 21% this year. It's suffocating states' budgets. It's adding trillions in obligations that we have no means to pay for it. Now, you're right to frame the debate on cost and health inflation. And in September, when you spoke to us in the well of the House, you basically said, and I totally agree with this, I will not sign a plan that adds one dime to our deficits, either now or in the future. Since the Congressional Budget Office can't score your bill because it doesn't have sufficient detail, but it tracks very similar to the Senate bill, I want to unpack the Senate score a little bit. And if you take a look at the CBO analysis from your chief actuary, I think it's very revealing. This bill does not control costs. This bill does not reduce deficits. Instead, this bill adds a new health care entitlement at a time when we have no idea how to pay for the entitlements we already have.
To think something so small can connect you to everything that matters.
When your life and all you love
are on the line.
HealthLink is always with you when every second counts in the emergency room, providing immediate access to your medical records.
Because Bob has trouble remembering all his medications.
Because I'm in love with my kids' kids.
Because my car lost control while driving.
Because now
I'm looking out for both of us.
Because I have diabetes, but it doesn't have me.
Because I spend my life in the ER trying to save yours.
Our constitutional journey did not stop then, and it must not stop now, Judge. And we'll be faced with equally consequential decisions in the 21st century. Can a microscopic tag be implanted in a person's body to track his every movement? There's actual discussion about that. You will rule on that, mark my words, before your tenure is over. Can brain scans be used to determine whether a person is inclined toward criminality or violent behavior? You will rule on that. And Judge, I need to know whether you will be a justice who believes that the constitutional journey must continue to speak to these consequential decisions, or that we've gone far enough in protecting against government intrusion into our autonomy, into the most personal decisions we make. Judge, that's why this is a critical moment.
We're going to go right back to Jan Crawford. She's had an opportunity to read more of the opinion. And Jan, what do you see?
Scott, we are processing what is in fact this complicated decision, but it appears the Chief Justice has joined with 4 of the court's liberals to uphold the mandate.
Jan, thank you very much. Headline of the hour. This is the most important thing that has happened so far. The Supreme Court has upheld the individual mandate, essentially affirming that President Obama's health care law is indeed constitutional. And the Congress did not exceed its authority when it essentially ordered every American to buy health insurance.
So I'm not saying we shouldn't have the right man in the White House. That could be very important. What I am saying is that the task is much bigger than that. People need to become active in politics. They need to become active in their communities and in disseminating information and helping to create public opinion and awareness on the issues so that it would be possible for the right man to be elected. Right now, you know, Ron Paul probably would have more support if people understood more about the Federal Reserve System. When he started to speak about it early in his campaign, most people were saying, huh, what's all that about? But because of the internet and because of the distribution of so much material on the Federal Reserve System, including my book, which probably played a small part in that, there was a substantial number of people who did understand that, hey, wait a minute, the Federal Reserve System isn't a government agency, it's a cartel, it's a banking cartel, and it's working against the public interest. So when there was enough people that could say that and understand what they were talking about, all of a sudden the momentum began to move toward Ron Paul instead of away from him. Yes, people still said, I don't know what he's talking about, but more and more people were saying, I do know what he's talking about, and he's right on target. And you reach a critical mass with that. When enough people start saying, yes, yes, he's right, then the others who don't know anything are listening say, what are they talking about? And now they take an interest. So I think that we're almost at the point now of this tipping point or the critical mass where people do understand the scam behind the Federal Reserve System. I think if Ron Paul and other candidates would just continue emphasizing this issue alone, I think it could make the difference. It could be the difference between recapturing the country and not doing so.
our segment on something you rarely hear about here in Washington, solutions to big problems. As always, we have two top voices from different sides of an issue, and we'll use this segment in hopes of pushing towards some progress. Today, we're talking about a brand new report exposing the shocking number of foreigners who illegally overstay their travel visas here in the U.S.
This is a very alarming report. It confirms what we've been suspicious of for a long time. We've had at least 5 different passages of laws that says a person needs to be clocked out of the country just as they're clocked into the country, so we know who overstayed their visas when they come here. What this report says is that in 2014 alone, 1 year, 400,000 plus people overstayed their visas.
That's GOP Senator Jeff Sessions, who has been talking quite a bit about this problem and held a hearing this week. So is there any common ground to find some solutions on this? Let's ask Fox News contributors Rick Grinnell and Santita Jackson. Good to see you both.
Good to see you.
All right, Santita, I'll start with you. I mean, this is a report that Congress has been pushing DHS for years. They finally got the first of its kind report, and we find out more than 400,000 people in 1 year overstayed their visas. And Congress said, you know, there were some hints from Democrats and Republicans alike thinking, we didn't get this information because DHS knows how bad it is.
Well, you know, I think the good news is that DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, has been doing such a good job. What the report doesn't tell us, or what that report didn't tell us, was that 45 million people come to the United States. So little more than 1% overstayed their visas. But in a time of anxiety and insecurity, well, great is not good enough. I mean, that's a little bit more than 1%. So what we have to do is figure out how we can get to 100% without sacrificing our liberty for security.
Yeah, it's a tricky balance. And Rick, since 2004, the law has required that DHS come up with some kind of format that the government find a way to track people. Here we are, 2016 now, and Rick, still, they haven't figured out a way to do it, even though they're required by law.
Yeah, and we know how to do this. I mean, we have the technology to follow someone from the moment they come into the United States on a visa. So look, we want to be welcoming. I think Santita is right. We want to be a country that says, come visit, have a great time when you come here, whether it's an immigrant or non-immigrant visa. We have requirements like every other country, but we need to be able to enforce the laws. Simply finding people on the day that they overstay their visa and getting them to leave, I don't think is too much. You have to have rules, otherwise it's going to be chaos. Everybody wants to come to the United States. We've got to set boundaries.
And Santita, when pressed, I mean, there were ICE officials, DHS officials, at least one who acknowledged the government is not tracking these people. You can't track 400,000 plus people. So unless they commit some kind of serious crime, they're not even on the government's radar for being here on an overstay. What is your bottom line? Because it seems we all agree there is a problem.
Well, bottom line, I don't want to put people in ankle bracelets and put chips on them. What I wanted to do is figure out whether people are coming to vacation or if we've got runaways, refugees, because that will determine why people are here. At the end of the day, Ben Franklin told us a couple of 100 years ago that if we sacrifice our liberty for security, we'll deserve neither. So we've got to come together and combine technological know-how, but not let technology overwhelm us so that it's controlling us. We need to control it.
And Rick, as to that technology, there are those within the government who testified this week saying we've tried to do this. It would cause massive backups at airports where people are departing the country, and it's super expensive. So even if we have the technology, these guys say it can't work. So what's your bottom line?
Look, it's a privilege to come to this country. It's not a right, it's a privilege, and we have to be able to enforce the rules. We have the technology, Shannon. We know how to do it. You may have to implement it through banking systems so that when someone uses their ATM card and we know where they are. My bottom line is we have the new technology. We should utilize it and not be afraid to utilize it.
All right. Thank you both, Rick and Santita. Great to see you for this week's Solutions. And you heard it there, folks. I mean, they both agree that we have technology, that we should be welcoming people who come to this country, but it's our responsibility as a government to track them, figure out where they are. Even if we just have a small fraction overstaying, it was only 5 who were here on overstayed visas who were part of the 9/11 hijacking. It's a threat none of us can ignore, regardless of party or political persuasion.
happens in seconds. Moms and dads, you know that feeling. Your child gets lost in a store, maybe just wanders off for a second or two. Your heart stops, though. Panic sets in, and you think the worst. It's happened to most of us, but what if you had a secret weapon, an extra layer of safety, so to speak? How far would you go to keep your children secure?
Would you be willing to microchip them? Experts tell us the technology already exists. Turns out one Bay Area mother is all for it, and she shared her story with our Melanie Michael.
Hey guys, good evening to you both. You know, chances are if you have a four-legged family member at home, it's already microchipped. And if the technology exists to save Fido in an emergency, what about microchipping your child? Before you say, no way, I would never do that, hear one mom's story.
It's the longest 2 seconds of your life, and it's absolute panic. I want my son back.
We've seen it in movies.
This is my daughter!
Over and over again, children gone missing.
It's terrifying.
For Stephanie Rodriguez-Neely, life is busier than ever, with 4 children, including a newborn. She knows scary situations can happen in an instant, and for her, it has.
If it'll save my kid, there's no step that's too extreme.
Stephanie's teenage daughter is a special needs child, prone to wander off and trust strangers. For that very reason, Stephanie wholeheartedly welcomes microchipping a child.
If a small chip the size of a grain of rice could have prevented a tragedy, I think most parents, hindsight would have said, I wish I would have done it.
But Stephanie is in the minority in her Tampa Bay moms group, where other mothers call this too sci-fi and invasive.
You're putting a battery in your kid, you're putting a chip in your kid, and where does it stop?
Turns out the technology to microchip your kids has existed since the early 90s, but hasn't really caught on.
Is it a little too science fiction for you?
Very much so.
A well-known technology expert out of Boston tells us microchipping poses little to no health risks and would act as a barcode of sorts.
Without question. It could save a life, reunite a family, find a missing Alzheimer's patient.
I always tell people, as long as you're doing what you feel is best for your child, you're not really wrong.
And guys, this is what we're talking about, the microchip. I don't know if you can see it in my hand. It's the size of a grain of rice, very, very small. And the expert that we spoke with actually tells us that barcodes were introduced in the late 1960s. And back then, people thought, this is way too invasive and too weird. And now barcodes are so commonplace that we don't even think about them anymore. The expert tells us this will happen sooner rather than later.
Well, and Mel, you said that the technology's been around since the 90s or whatever, but I mean, have companies actually tried this? That's a different scenario.
Two of them, as a matter of fact. Both of those companies ended up going defunct. They tried initial public offerings. It did not go through, but you can bet somewhere, someday, someone is going to pull this off, and we could see those microchips in everyone.
That's interesting to think about. Melanie Michael live in Tampa. Thank you for that report.
Excuse me, sir. Forgot your receipt.
Checkout lines. Who needs them?
Have a nice day.
This is the future of e-business.
Ja, van contactloos betalen wordt iedereen blij. Het is snel, makkelijk en iedereen kan het. Doe het ook met je betaalpas of mobiel.
Eventually what's happening is that we are being led bit by bit through, to use the Skinnerian term, from shaping, through the successive approximation to ultimately having within our bodies an RFID chip that will be implanted, that people will stand in line and in queues for to have, so that ultimately we will have in our bodies. Because what we're doing right now, Lindsay, is we're slowly moving towards that. We went from the desktop to the laptop to the phone to the watch, and now we're having little tattoos, little biometrics, all of them leading to the ultimate goal, and that is an RFID, a radio frequency identification or similar chip, to be placed subcutaneously. And that chip, Lindsay, will have everything about you there is. Your bank account, your GPS location, and you will do it. You will get one. Because after all, it will also have the siren call of medical information. And then one day, God forbid, not you, one day when people are found guilty of, let's say, crimes, they're not going to be put into the Hoosgow, in the pokey. No, their chip is going to be turned off and poof, they don't exist anymore. That's where all of this is going. Think about it, Lindsay. No more wallets. You want to pay for your bill? Go like that. Because there's the chip. Just go like that. We'll do these little hand waves. This will be everything. And then, as I said, the moment you transgress and that chip is turned off, you don't exist anymore. People won't be able to see you on their GPS devices, even though you're looking right at them. They're saying, I'm sorry, Lindsay, this isn't registering. Because without this, without my ability to pick up the metrics, the biometrics, the electronic metrics of you, you don't exist.
To think something so small could control you.
And everything you do. When your life and all you love are on the line.
The RFID chip is always with you, threatening your privacy, causing severe risk to your health and personal safety, and killing you if you do not obey rogue government demands.
Because I want to increase my risk of cancer.
Because I want to live in a cash-free society.
Because now the government is looking out for us.
Because I have the mark of the beast, but it doesn't have me.
Ask your doctor how to get your chip implanted today.
Because we want to track your every move.
Picture yourself in one of these scenarios. You go shopping and your credit card transaction is denied despite the fact that you know you have money in your account. Or you go to an ATM machine and you're informed that your withdrawal request has been denied. Or You're a public official, such as a school business administrator, county treasurer, municipal finance manager, pension fund administrator, or anyone who has responsibility for protecting public taxpayer funds. You're informed that all accounts have been frozen until further notice. As you investigate why you can't access money you know should be available, you find out that the bank has failed and has been closed until further notice by the FDIC. You also discover that the government will be confiscating part of your deposits in order to stabilize the bank. You believe that this can't happen here because the FDIC protects your money. You may have placed your money into one of the big banks because it has large vaults and is protected by the government. You may have placed public monies into a large bank because they're collateralized and the government will back them. Therefore, you think these funds are safe. All of these assumptions are not based on the facts. Perhaps you recall that in Cyprus, depositors' money was confiscated in order to stabilize the banks. Similar plans are already in place to do the same in the U.S. and other countries. In a nutshell, the banks in Cyprus were over-leveraged to the point that their liabilities exceeded their gross domestic product. Because the global bailouts of large banks in 2008 were so politically unpopular, a global banking troika of the International Monetary Fund, the European Central Bank, and the European Union imposed a bail-in in which bank customers were to have some of their savings seized in order to stabilize the banks. The losses to some clients were as high as 60%.
Cyprus was the test run. Now, that's where the European Union kind of let the cat out of the bag, what they planned to do on a bigger scale. But depositors took a real haircut. Interestingly, though, of course, the big boys got out because the insiders knew what was coming. And the insiders will know what's coming when the next U.S. bank burns down. They'll get out and they'll leave the mom and pop depositors and maybe city governments holding the bag.
In order to protect themselves, the Cyprus government closed the banks 12 days, and people had limited access to their money. Long lines formed at the ATM machine.
The fact is that the confiscations in Cyprus were not a one-time event. The eventuality for this had already been planned in advance, and there are plans in place for confiscations of depositor accounts in New Zealand, the European Union, Canada, England, and the United States.
And we passed Dodd-Frank legislation. And people think, well, that's it for bailouts. No, that's not it. Actually, it's just going to be a bail-in. In order to maintain liquidity in failed banks, the European Union and the Federal Reserve have a policy of bailing in, which means you seize depositors' deposits. Those could be mom and pop up to their $250,000. It could be a city's deposits on deposit. It could be bondholders. That's what happened in Cyprus. That's what's happening right now with the Cooperative Bank in London, England, and that's what the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation and the Bank of England have jointly agreed to do here in the United States.
Looking at the FDIC Bank of England joint paper summary, the text clearly says that in the U.S., they will use the powers granted under the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Act, and losses will be assigned to shareholders and unsecured creditors. Remember that as a depositor in a bank, under the law, you are an unsecured creditor. Moving further on down in this document, the text clearly says that the strategy for a failed global systemically important financial institution will be to assign losses to shareholders and unsecured creditors.
Okay, everybody, this is a quick update to the current banking state of affairs. In Europe, the Austrians have just announced that they are bailing in the creditors of one of their banks. This bank is the Heta Bank. They nationalised it about a year ago, and now they've announced under the new laws that came in Europe on the 1st of January 2016 that they will be taking the bank over completely and giving the senior major creditors a complete haircut, 100%. Now this will mainly be institutions, insurance companies and large banks, but also smaller institutions will also be taking a haircut of over 50%. The interesting thing about all this is that there's absolutely no news about this in the major media. It's been picked up by some of the financials like Forbes and Bloomberg, but if you do a search, I did one here on the BBC, Austrian bank, HEPA Bank, bail-in, absolute silence. Quite incredible that the major media are just doing a complete embargo on this kind of story. Around the world, Americans, Australia, New Zealand, everywhere, the regulators will be watching this to see what public reaction is, because this is all test casing. This is seeing what do the public do when they are aware of this, and just like with Cyprus, the answer will be basically nothing. People will take it on the chin, lose their savings, take a huge haircut, and absolutely do nothing about it. And this will encourage them, because when the next financial crisis comes, and it's on its way, we're going to see a domino effect in the banks as they begin to fail, and they will be bailing in your funds. So my advice to you is be very, very careful about where you keep your savings.
Does the government work for us, or do we work for the government? Tonight, what if the Constitution no longer applied? What if the whole purpose of the Constitution was to limit the government? What if Congress's enumerated powers in the Constitution no longer limited Congress, but were actually used as a justification to extend Congress's authority over every realm of human life? What if the president, meant to be an equal to Congress, has instead become a democratically elected, term-limited monarch? What if the president assumed that everything he did was legal just because he's the president? What if he could interrupt your regularly scheduled radio and TV programming for a special message from him? What if he could declare war on his own? What if he could read your emails and your texts without a search warrant? What if he could kill you without warning? What if Supreme Court justices no longer looked to the Constitution to determine the constitutionality of a law, but rather simply to what justices who preceded them thought about it? What if the rights and principles guaranteed in the Constitution have been so distorted in the past 200 years as to be unrecognizable by the founders? What if the 50 states were no longer sovereign entities, equals to each other, and parents of the federal government they voluntarily constituted? What if the states were mere provinces of a totally nationalized and fully centralized government? What if the Constitution was amended stealthily, not by constitutional amendments duly ratified by the states, but by the constant and persistent expansion of the federal government's role in our lives? What if the federal government decided if its own powers were proper and constitutional? What if the Constitution were no longer the supreme law of the land? What if you needed a license from the government to speak, to assemble, or to protest against the government? What if the government didn't like what you planned to say, and so it didn't give you the license? What if the right to keep and bear arms only applied to the government? What if posse comitatus, the federal law that prohibits our military from occupying our streets, were no longer in effect? What if the government considered the military an adequate dispenser of domestic law enforcement? What if cops looked and acted like troops and you couldn't distinguish the military from the police? What if you were not secure in your person, in your papers, and in your property? What if federal agents could write their own search warrants in defiance of the Constitution? What if the government could decide when you were and were not entitled to a jury trial? What if the government could take your property whenever it wanted? What if the government could continue prosecuting you until it got the verdict it wanted? What if the government could force you to testify against yourself simply by labeling you a domestic terrorist? What if the government could torture you until you said what the government wanted to hear? What if people running for president actually supported torture? What if the government tortured your children to get to you? What if government judges and government lawyers intimidated juries into convicting the innocent? What if the government could send you to your death and your innocence meant nothing so long as the government's procedures were followed? What if America's prison population, the largest in the world, was a cruel and unusual way for a country to be free? What if half the prison population never harmed anyone but themselves? What if the people had no rights except those the government chose to let them have? What if the states had no rights except to do as the federal government commanded? What if our elected officials didn't really live among us, but instead all had their hearts and homes in Washington, D.C.? What if the government could strip you of your rights because of where your mother was when you were born? What if the income tax was unconstitutional? What if the states were convinced to give up their representation in Congress? What if the government tried to ban you from using a substance in your body that is older than the government itself? What if voting didn't mean anything anymore because both political parties stand for big government? What if the government could write any law, regulate any behavior, and tax any event? The Constitution be damned. What if the government was the reason we don't have a Constitution anymore? What if you could love your country but hate what the government has done to it? What if sometimes to love your country, you had to alter or abolish the government? What if Jefferson was right? What if that government is best which governs least? What if I'm right? What if the government is wrong? What if it is dangerous to be right when the government is wrong? What if it is better to perish fighting for freedom than to live as a slave? What if freedom's greatest hour of danger is now?